Back before the pandemic, in a way yonder time before the current atmosphere of animosity boiled through social media, unfounded conspiracy theories, and bad acting political figures perpetuated a culture war, I visited a truly unique place not found anywhere else in the world. It's a modest building for its significance. Cut granite blocks forms the first story, the granite originating from Stanstead, where one half the building resides. Yellow bricks darkened from over a century of weathering constructs the second story, and granite trim and balustraded porches accentuate the second floor of the Queen Anne Revival-style building. The roof is lined with dormers, gables, and slate shingles that project the ambition of 20th century construction. Further care is shown inside, with rich woodwork, paneled doors, and cozy fireplaces. A large backline bifurcates the building. On the Canadian side is the adult book section and the computer lab. On the American, the child's reading room. The checkout counter, symbolically, is split in two. An opera house, not often open to the public, comprises the second floor. Though past its heyday, one can see why rumors spread that it was modeled after the Boston Opera House, even though the latter was built later. All of this, until recently, accessible to citizens of two enormous nations. Outside, a barricade blocks a street, once connected, but has now been obstructed a long time. A mother parks near the edge, casually, without concern of the heavily armed American Border Patrol officer who sits in his patrol car, one hand on the wheel, the other hand on his bulletproof vest. She walks to the back of her car, opens the door, leans in. One young boy hops out of the car, still too little to touch the ground when seated in the sedan. Then she walks to the other side, unstraps the infant from the baby carriage. With her oldest holding her left hand and carrying the youngest in her right, she walks through the barricade, onto the front cement steps, and enters through heavy wooden doors, thick to prevent heat escaping during the harsh winters. Through the simple act, the Quebecois family had just crossed international boundaries, joining their Vermont neighbors in a fundamentally good resource to both their communities, which is just one. Hello, welcome back to the library, and before we get lost amongst the stacks, I want to introduce my guest today, the book baroness herself, returning to discuss something that is very pertinent to the modern day, Theresa Keller.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Theresa. Now, when I started this podcast, I explained I wanted to talk about writers, their works, movements, and basically all things concerning books. And what else concerns books more than where books are stored and openly shared into the public, right? Famous libraries are a topic I wanted to discuss, and in fact, I began doing research on historic libraries as some of have pretty wild histories. Some of these include the Library of Congress in the United States itself, Library of Alexandria, and the certain destruction of priceless art during the Iraq War. I was also in the middle of writing a totally different script, but as you're aware, something happened within the last 48 hours to 72 hours that made me have to pivot. Something very close to home for both of us, with me metaphorically speaking, as my mother is a librarian. I grew up in libraries and have a nerdy fascination of them. Mm-hmm. And for you, literally based on geography. So today we are going to talk about one of the coolest libraries in the world, if only for the emblematic place in Canadian and American relations it holds today. Yes, we're going to talk about the Haskell Free Library, located in Derbyline, Vermont, and Stanstead, Quebec.
And this is truly in my neighborhood. This is a place where it is the closest venue where we can go and see shows. We actually went with my future in-laws. We went to go see the Addams Family in the Opera House.
Wait, what? The Addams Family?
Yes, they had Addams Family the musical. And I know we'll get into the long history, but it was amazing that the cast actually pulled star power from Cirque du Soleil.
What?
Yes.
Cirque du Soleil. Wow, okay.
Alongside your run-of-the-mill, like, mediocre altos from the local high schools. So it's truly a gem. It's a place where we go often. So it's a wild time.
Well, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. It's still, the Opera House is still functional, because I actually didn't really look into much of the history of the current shows, but glad to hear that you're still going there. There you go. It's like, what, 30 minutes from here at most? Probably less than that.
Yeah, no, I think it's
And that's all back
like
roads.
18 minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's close.
Okay. So before we dive into the history of the library, let's chat about the history of the two towns that it straddles. Back before firm international borders were a concept, because that is actually a truly modern concept.
Yes, it is.
The Western Abenaki were heralds of the land that now comprises all of, most of Vermont, New Hampshire, and southern Quebec. I believe the tribe that we are talking about in the areas east of Lake Memphremagog were the Missisquoi. However, it could be the, and I don't know how to pronounce this, but Arisganatog. Oh, whatever.
Can't help you.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm familiar with the Missisquoi. These people are also referred as the St. Francis Indians due to the Jesuit mission that converted many people within the tribe to Catholicism. During the French and Indian War, the town of St. Francis was burnt down by Rogers' Rangers, a company of British soldiers from New Hampshire. Don't worry. Whilst returning back from the attack against the Abenaki, 2 men were killed by wolves in where we know as Granby.
Oh.
Granby, Vermont today. Yeah. Which is still in the middle of fucking nowhere, Granby. Let's be real. It was the middle of nowhere back then. It's the middle of nowhere now. And it must have been more so back then. Their burial site is actually now a state historic site, randomly. After the end of the French and Indian Wars, the Abenaki raided British villages in the area as reprisal, which makes sense. If you're going to burn down somebody's home and village and everything like that, let's be real, they're going to burn down your home as well.
Reaction.
Yeah, right. That's Newton's second law or third law? Every action has a reaction or something.
Equal and opposite reaction. Yeah.
Or is that the first? I don't remember
I
that.
can never remember.
Yeah, it's one of the Newton's laws.
It's not the third.
It's not the third. It's the first. Rogers' Rangers would eventually fight under Benedict Arnold during his Champlain expedition before Benedict Arnold turned coat. After the American Revolutionary War, many of the Abenaki abandoned their lands in what is modern-day Vermont, specifically in the Northeast Kingdom, because they were fearing retribution. They migrated north to the mission itself of St. Francis. So what are you going to do with all that land that's in no one's hand? That's right. The whites are going to settle it with immigrants from Connecticut.
Oh, God.
Okay. I'm going to redo that. What you going to do with all that land? All that land is no one's hand. That's where everyone's going to settle. That with immigrants from Connecticut. Yeah.
Woo.
I'm happy about that. At least that's what happened with Derby. Derby, the entire town of Derby, was chartered on October 29th, 1779, back when Vermont was its own country for the first time. And I say the first because, well, there very may well be the second. Maybe. Who the fuck knows?
We keep voting in certain gores and towns. We keep voting.
Yes. Now, quoting a book published in 1859 that I found online, written by Austin J. Coolidge and John B. Mansfield. The book is called A History of and Description of New England, which riveting fucking stuff. Quote, Derby, in the northeast part of Orleans County, extends 7.5 miles on the Canadian line. It was chartered to Timothy Andrus and 59 others, which is 10 short of the nice number. The first settlement was made. He did write that, by the way.
Oh, okay.
Okay, cool.
In the book?
In the book, yeah. No, it's the
direct quote.
Direct quote. The first settlement was made in 1795 by Alexander Magoon. Henry
Magoon.
Magoon.
Mm-hmm. There's a Magoon Park just across town.
Is it?
Yeah.
That sounds fake.
Magoon. No, it's Magoon. Anyway.
Okay, cool. That sounds like something that you literally, like, as a teenager, like a kid, you call somebody a Magoon because they're idiots or something like that.
Or it's like your cranky neighbor, old man Magoon.
All right. Alexander Magoon, Henry Buzel, and the Honorable Timothy Hinman, the last of whom did much towards the settlement of the town in making roads and other improvements. Emigrants from Connecticut and other places soon made Derby a flourishing town. For some years, it was visited by hunting parties of the St. Francis Indians, who formerly claimed all the north part of the state. Unquote. The entire town of Derby back then was actually a small gem for farming, as the ground was far more level than the rest of the region. And it still is a huge farming town today that we will talk about shortly. Mm-hmm. Any questions? Anything you want to add right now?
This is great because Hinman Settler Road is
right
somewhere
there.
else where some neighbors' friends live. This is good. I'm learning more about the history of where I live.
Derby Line itself, which is the part that we're going to talk about, is an incorporated village within Derby, and called so because it is on the line of the United States and Canada. Speaking of the Canadian border, on the other side, Beebe Plain was colonized around 1789 by Ziba Beebe of Connecticut, which sounds fucking fake. Ziba Beebe. It sounds like literally back like when a kindergartner had to make up a name, you know?
Yeah, or like, one Mormon, question mark?
No, Mormons aren't even in existence then.
Oh, that's true, because Thomas hadn't been born, or what's his face? Joseph Smith, because he was born in Vermont too.
Yeah, like 20, 30, probably 40 years later, 30 years later.
Man.
Yeah.
Heck of a name.
Heck of
Interesting.
a name, yeah. A few years later, in 1796, Stanstead Plain was founded by Johnson Taplin, who came from southern New England, also probably from Connecticut, one source I read, but probably not sure about that. Also, he went there to settle to farm. So now we're keeping all of these lands with the time-honored tradition of Orleans County being settled by Connecticuters.
Yikes. I also did not know this.
Yeah, there you go. Rock Island was settled in 1798 by Samuel and Salah Pomeroy of Massachusetts. I'm going to skip ahead 2 centuries here from the last settlement that we just talked about, but it wouldn't be until 1995 did these 3 villages get incorporated into what we know as Stanstead today, the town we know and love and are going to talk about. Prior to merging, this area was informally known as Les Trois Villages, or the 3 villages. That's the best I can do with French.
Les Trois Villages.
Les Trois Villages.
Moi, je parle français.
I took so many years of French, and I fucking suck at it. It's brutal.
It's okay. You can be understood. That's all that matters.
Yeah, I can like kind of read it. Rock Island is actually where the Haskell Free Library was built, so out of the 3 villages. Even though the 3 were different villages, I will refer to them today in this podcast as one called Stanstead for our own ease. The town's website states that, quote, at first, Stanstead was lost in the sticks, a haven for smugglers and bootleggers. But the situation improved with the establishment of a customs station in 1821, the first of the eastern townships, which is the region of Quebec south and east of Montreal, basically, my understanding. Stanstead grew in importance and became the first Canadian stop for the stagecoach that ran between Boston and Quebec City. Stanstead still keeps a remnant of its heyday in the form of numerous historical and beautiful buildings, unquote. And this is true. In both Stanstead and Derby, the architecture is still very well preserved. It's just something that you could see out of the 19th and early 20th century, to the point that Stanstead Plain is still considered and referred to as, quote, an open museum, quote, to this day.
Yeah, it's in stark contrast to if you're going to Stanstead, you might pass through Newport City, and considering that Newport is more recent of a city, but also became a stopping point between Montreal and Boston back in the day, we do not have the beautiful buildings that Stanstead still is able to maintain.
Now, I think it is important to note that the U.S.-Canadian border was established in 1783, at least in New York and in Vermont, with the Treaty of Paris, which ended the Revolutionary War as well. Mm-hmm. Yes, this was also when Vermont was its own country, just pointing that out again, but you get my point. Mm-hmm. This was before any southern New Englander moved up to any of the villages that we spoke about that established these villages. But as you can imagine, being this is close to the border caused problems pretty fucking early on. Let's say on the date of December 27th, 1813, when a small detachment of British soldiers from Stanstead crossed the border and attacked a military supply depot in Derby. There were not many casualties, actually 0 in total, but it did destroy the supply depot of the Vermont militia in the area. This wasn't a random attack. It was during the War of 1812, a war notable due to the fact that a bunch of Canadians burnt down the White House.
Ooh.
Yeah. There was also a massive hurricane in 1815 that caused extensive property damage and crop failure throughout all the region. And then in 1816, there was the year that was known without a summer, a.k.a. the year of 2 winters, a.k.a. vernacularly was called 1800 and froze to death.
Oh.
This caused harsh frosts all summer long. Derby and the surrounding areas began to heavily rely on timber and potash creation as their main economic export to basically feed themselves for a short period of time. So it opened up the land there. It's an important note for their history.
And that, I think, is also what helped establish Newport on the lake, because the logging industry, the body of water, they floated it all down.
Mm-hmm. I didn't get into this, but at one point, the population in the 1800s in Derby itself almost halved because the town of Newport Town was created, and that was where everybody went to. It was just West Derby at the time.
Oh.
So I was trying to find like realistic statistics of population growth and decline.
Yeah.
It was actually very difficult because of how many towns are merging and removing themselves. Sure. You know, at one point, the town of Stanstead tripled or something like that because they all merged together. So because these towns were so close together, they were economically tied together. Mm-hmm. Roads and buildings were built completely disregarding the 45th parallel, which was the international border. An example of this today is the Rue Canusa or Canusa.
Canusa.
Where about 1,800 feet of it is literally on the actual border, and people who live on the American side have Canadian addresses because people live on both sides of the street. I actually don't know if they're Canadian citizens or they're American citizens, but that's pretty crazy.
Can I add a bonkers story that we had just happen on Canusa like 2 weeks ago?
Sure.
Okay, so the closest bowling alley to us is in Stanstead. So we crossed the border. It's 15 minutes from our house, and we were coming back from bowling, and there was still snow on the road, and our friend John was driving, pulled over because he thought it was like the side of a road, but they had just plowed Canusa Road to look flat instead of like plowed to look like it was snow. So his truck sank down like 3 feet, was no longer on the road. I tried to call AAA. They sent me to like Canada AAA, which was a whole thing. A police officer came. But first, everyone stopped. Every single person driving on that road stopped to ask us if we were okay, what we needed. Everyone spoke both French and English. Everyone was just so kind, wanted to make sure that we were safe. Ultimately, we ended up waiting for 2.5 hours for a tow truck to drive over from Quebec, which is not close. But when he got there, he told us that we were very lucky because as Americans, we went off the road on the Canadian lane. If we had gone off the road on the other side of the street, we would have been on the American side, which means that no tow truck would have been able to cross the border in order to pull us out of the ditch.
Yeah, it's pretty fucked up. Yeah, we're going to talk about some of this stuff too.
It's insane.
Yeah. Which is crazy because there's a row of houses that live there. How do they get there?
Well, yeah.
Are they, again, I don't know if they're Americans or not. Like, we could probably knock on their door, but who knows if we're breaking international boundaries there.
The way that so you cross one border and then there's Canusa Road. You can make a right, and if you like live there, you like don't have to check in regularly, but basically they know everyone who lives there and they will chase you down if you accidentally like don't go through customs. It's wild. I have a lot of stories about crossing the border in this town.
I bet. Well, I mean, just to exemplify it, the Rock of Ages, Canada, their building is partially in the United States. There's also a weapons manufacturer up there that has since back in the day, and I didn't write this as something because I just found out about it, but it went through a lot of changes, but now it's owned by a weapons manufacturer. And in the 80s, The Canadians on the Canadian side protested, and they shut down the Canadian half of it, even though half the building is in Canada.
Wow.
Because they were protesting for equal rights, and I guess that's probably a fault of the United States. And we'll talk about laws later in the Americas and how they're disparate of international unity, unfortunately.
Did you say that was in the 80s?
Yeah.
Oh, so 1985, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That was the latest constitutional act. I'm writing a paper about it for school.
There you go. It was under Reagan. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So we're not exaggerating. Next door neighbors then and now have different nationalities, and I'm not talking like a field's length distance. I'm not talking about football lengths. I'm not exaggerating when I'm saying that there are literal residential apartment complexes that sit right on the border, and the person in the apartment next to you is in a different country, period. The development of this was completely necessary in the sense of economics, social interaction, and strategically. Because as the community grew, so did the industry, particularly in Stanstead where granite quarries were dug. This was a major employer in the region, and it's not difficult to imagine, because it's true, people living south of the border fluidly crossing north for work. The Rock of Ages, Canada, is still a remnant of that time, as I just mentioned. Stanstead basically became a small boom town due to the granite industry, and it became the granite capital of Canada at one point. It was the county seat for a long time as well, only really declining when the railroads failed, as they did everywhere in North America. And the U.S. side, Derby was known for its farming primarily, as stated before. Particularly, it was known for its hops production, hops for beer. The town of Derby accounted for 22.7% of hops production in the entire state of Vermont by 1880.
Wow.
Yeah. When hops production shifted away from the state due to economic factors and due to prohibition, which we'll talk about later, dairy and maple filled the farming void and is still the main product of, these are the main products of the region to this day, which caused later some problems in the 50s regarding monopolization of farms and such like that. We won't talk about that, but it was a problem. So, for over 100 years, the border towns lived as harmoniously as any other towns would, realistically. It was prosperous for an area, for both towns, let's say, that at its height, which is today, only about 7,500 people live, and that's between two towns, and that is current statistics. The economics shifted, of course, and we have touched upon it briefly, and we will get more on the economic shifts later on shortly. But during its heyday, as it turned to the 20th century, when the construction of the Haskell Free Library had begun. Now, I'm going to quote this directly from the library site, and it's going to be a long quote, so I don't know if you have anything you want to add before we continue. Any questions so far?
No questions. Carry on.
Well, quote, "The Haskell Free Library in Alper House was the gift of Martha Stewart Haskell," which is fucking hilarious, "and her son, Colonel Horace Stewart Haskell. It was dedicated to Mrs. Haskell's late husband, Carlos, a prominent merchant. The family's aim was to provide the border communities with a center for learning and cultural enrichment. The Opera House also had a practical purpose. According to the original charter, which dated in 1908, it was to be forever managed and used for the support and maintenance of the library located downstairs. The cornerstone of the Haskell Free Library and Opera House was laid on April 15th, 1901, by members of Stanstead's Golden Rule Lodge, assisted by prominent masons from both sides of the border, including Colonel Haskell himself."
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
Is that Mason with a capital M or little m?
Capital M.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a big difference there. Good question. I actually lowercased that because I didn't realize. Yeah, whatever. Yep, big masons, the conspiracy types. Yeah, I'm not sure. There's no conspiracy here. Though it's funny because Bill Gates comes into the story eventually.
Twist. No spoilers, please.
The building was designed by Stanstead architect James Ball and his partner Gilbert Smith of Boston. Construction was supervised by Nathan Beach, a contractor from Georgeville, Quebec. After a number of delays, the building was completed in 1904 at an estimated cost of $50,000, which was a princely sum at the time. And I had to look. I don't know how correct this is because the correct statistics of like the Bureau of Labor and Statistics that do inflation only goes back to 1913.
Mm-hmm.
I found something that was 1904. They say it translates to about $1,800,000 today, a little under that. Also, I want to note how many people were involved on the Quebec side of the border in the construction. After construction, the Haskell family donated the library, as you are supposed to do because it's private construction until it's not, right? That's just how these things go.
Mm-hmm.
To the towns of Derby and Rock Island, which is now Stanstead. To this day, the library is run privately by an international board of 4 Americans and 3 Canadian directors.
Which is amazing.
And it doesn't matter. It really, the head director of the library, right, could be anybody between the 2 towns or anybody in the surrounding villages.
Okay.
Now, we wouldn't be talking about this library if there wasn't conflict, even early on, right? And we wouldn't be talking about the U.S. of motherfucking A if there wasn't some stupid fucking legislation that was passed. Back then when the House and Senate actually passed their legislation and did their fucking jobs.
Mm-hmm.
On January 16th, 1919, the 18th Amendment was ratified, prohibiting the manufacturing, sale, or transportation of intoxicating liquors within, the importation thereof into, and the exportation thereof from the United States and all territory subject to the jurisdiction thereof for beverage purposes. They banned booze.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I just wanted to be very direct on the 18th Amendment. Now, smuggling had always been a huge role for these border towns, period. One of the reasons, my view, is because of tariffs. Tariffs enacted by both countries began as, well, at least in Canada, began as early as 1858, from what I can find. And it was the Cayley-Galt tariff, which was 20% on all manufactured goods, 10% on partially manufactured goods. There was also the national policy, which was introduced in 1879, which were high tariffs on imported manufactured items to protect the manufacturing industry, which is the point of tariffs, right? You're supposed to protect industry that way. That there's a legitimate reason to have tariffs.
Mm-hmm.
And that national policy would take decades to dismantle all the way up until the World Wars. There was some sort of other, policy that happened the year before the first tariff I mentioned, but I didn't find anything enacting that was actually important, and I don't really understand Canadian history tariffs, so that's what I got from that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you go into the duty-free stores at all?
Never.
Okay. But because now that we're talking about tariffs on the Canadian border, you always see the duty-free. How the heck does that apply with tariffs?
It's international boundary. That's the thing.
So I might be...
it's a legal loophole, right?
It should be. And then, if you do live in a border town, you can actually just walk there. You don't have to drive.
Yep, exactly. That's also kind of considered smuggling, kind of. But
so we don't call it smuggling. We just call it duty-free. Good to know.
Kind of. Not. It's a legal loophole, right? Kind of. It's not smuggling, but it kind of is. On the U.S. side, let's say that we have a fucking long history of tariffs. It's a long, long one. And it's difficult to parse out what exactly we're going to talk, what tariffs are affecting Canada in this episode, because I'm not joking. I started looking at and went into a rabbit hole. I'm like, this is fucking unnecessary. Just know that the tariffs started since 1789, which is basically when we became a country. Mm-hmm. The purpose of tariffs are trying to protect whatever industry it correlates to the goods being tariffed. So when the U.S. doubled the tariffs on solar cells and triple tariffs on lithium-ion electric vehicle batteries imported from China, they did this to protect solar and electric vehicle manufacturing, which happened in May 2024 under President Joe Biden, something a certain person with the name similar to Elmo and his last name literally translates or means or defined as bad odor doesn't want you to know.
I like that. I like how you put it.
There you go. You can imagine, however, that anything that could be smuggled was smuggled here. According to the Kingdom Guide website, it was, quote, everything from people, animals, and all sorts of goods, unquote. And I have to say that people, I'm sure there's nefarious reasons of it, but in the 1800s, there was also the Underground Railroad that was happening, and I'm going to just imagine that that's part of it. Animals, I think that makes total sense. I mean, back in the day when livestock, to this day, actually, we probably are smuggling livestock over the border realistically that we don't even know.
I still don't think you can bring pork or chicken. You can't.
Into Canada?
Across that border. Yeah.
The
chicken, poultry is because of the avian flu, whatever. And then the swine in like Western Canada had something.
Yeah. It's highly regulated for a reason, right? Like,
right. But it's so crazy that they can be so geographically close, but just be regulated so differently. Well, and so then they're like, just don't do it. Don't bring it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, when we were in Puerto Rico, right, they checked us like avidly for even within the country for like pork products. We're like, we don't have pork products. Like, what are you talking about? We're coming back from fucking vacation, our honeymoon. Yeah.
Didn't you left the pork rinds at home? Yeah.
With George H.W. Bush. Yeah. So if you can imagine, smuggling was probably ramped up during Prohibition during the early 1920s and 30s.
Oh yeah.
Now, quoting that Kingdom Guide article again, quote, the U.S. Border Patrol opened its first headquarters in this area in 1924. The location was Newport City, which is objectively a terrible place to put it if you're going to have it somewhere. There's no fucking international border in Newport City. It's the lake. It's
true. It's the lake. You have to cross the lake. But back then, they didn't have strong torches.
Yeah.
So you could probably scoot your boat across pretty quietly.
But like, there's so many places to stop before Newport City.
There are.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Continuing the quote. But 5 years later, that command post was moved to Derby Line. Since then, the headquarters has moved several times, and it's now located in Swanton. I also found this online snippet about the building that was built back then in the 1930s. Pretty interesting. Quoting the website called Buildings of New England, quote, this border crossing is located between the villages of Derby Line, Vermont, and Stanstead, Quebec, both of which are developed up to the border. And without the security and signage, you'd never guess they are different countries. The cross-border relationship was cemented in part by the construction in 1904 of the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, which straddles the border and provides library service to both communities. Mm-hmm. This station was formally opened in 1932 when the main building was completed. It is one of several standardized inspection station layouts developed in the United States territory. It's developed by the United States Treasury Department and was the largest and most architecturally sophisticated of those buildings in Vermont in the 1930s.
Ooh.
It was built as part of a program to improve border security developed to respond to increased use of the automobile, fancy, increased illegal border crossing, and smuggling related to prohibition. After the 9/11 attacks, the border was secured and a new station directly on the border was built, unquote.
Okay. Which station on the border? Is it in BB Plains or is it the large crossing on 91?
It's the BB Plains one.
Okay.
On Derby Line, yeah.
Okay.
Good question. So you could imagine, and you could see, even with tariffs, the fluidity of the border and the crossing to do things like shop and work was still incredibly common, even back then.
Absolutely.
It was only after a strict enforced law that really began to divide things for the first time, such as prohibition, but still, it was pretty fluid. Of course, prohibition came to an end, but the border station remained. However, what I would say is that it is fairly loosely patrolled up until a certain point. I didn't have time to dive into the stories of catching smugglers because, well, if you live in Vermont, you know that smuggling is embedded in our state's history. Prohibition was a complete failure in every way you look at it, with the exception of maybe it caused people to drink less than they did now than they did back then. But that causation probably doesn't cause correlation realistically.
Yeah,
there's a lot of health fucking things that we learned about.
Yes.
The Haskell Public Library and Opera House ran smoothly throughout the 20th century. The building was recognized as a national in the National Register of Historical Places in the U.S. Since 1976. It was Quebec Provincial Historical Site since 1977 and designated a National Historic Site in Canada since 1985. The Opera House would have shows steadily until 1993, where it was closed by the U.S. government due to handicapped access and fire safety. Very reasonable. Yeah. It reopened in 1997 with a full schedule of shows in the spring to fall that year.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, woo, pets are going crazy. It's all good.
It might be some neighbors walking past,
Do,
and they
do,
might
do, do,
walk
do,
slowly.
do, 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 do.
Yeah. Right? What? Who would be your sponsor today? I'm just kidding.
The Haskell Free Public Library.
Hey, there we go.
The Austrian restaurant in Derby. That would be great.
Oh my God, Derby Line Village Inn, Fritz. Yes.
Let's go. Of course, as laws and regulations progressed, things became more complicated. Now I'm quoting Eric Weiner from the BBC.
Oh.
Which is all around very unfortunate name.
Yes, it is.
The article is from 2017 called "The U.S. Border Canada Runs Through This Tiny Library," unquote. So here's a quote from Eric Weiner, again from the BBC. Quote, dude, they must have seen his resume and said, yeah, you're for the BBC.
I don't know if their industry is as big as our industry. Or that's how they introduced him, like for his first short, you know? We'll never know.
We don't know. Okay, quote, because I'm being immature. Managing a binational enterprise is absolutely complex, said Nancy Rummery, the library's director at the time, who, while Canadian, uses we when referring to Canadians or Americans. There are international exchange rates to contend with. The library accepts both currencies. There are no fines, but they sell postcards and other mementos. And 2 sets of safety regulations. The library uses whichever is strictest. Going out to lunch requires crossing an international border. It's easier to order in. Rummery must negotiate not only with readers hunting for the latest Stephen King novel, but also with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which always catches their guy, U.S. Homeland Security, which rarely catches the guy, and the International Border Commission, which I didn't know existed, among other things. Then there was the time 15 years ago when the library wanted to install a new lift. The lift was in Canada, but bringing the crane, which was in the U.S., to the other side, even for a few hours, meant paying hefty duties.
Yikes.
The solution? Leave the crane on U.S. soil and host the lift through Canadian airspace, unquote. Going back to your story about having to be lifted, or getting your car towed because it was in the snow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad they came to that resolution. Otherwise, it would have been stupid.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? This was written in 2017, 15 years prior, doing some quick math. That was 2002, right? And a lift is an elevator. This is the BBC talking. So,
yes.
Yeah. Let's go back to that year, to 2001. And here I say, make funny bubbly noises. That's us going back in time. We're in 2001. Theresa, do you remember the year 2001? Specifically September of 2001. What do you think happened at that time? What would have been a monumentous occasion that would have changed history forever? Something that would have damaged the American psyche, specifically the millennials. Something that will absolutely be known as a horrific, changing, monumental point in our lifetime because facts. That's right. The Haskell Free Library and Opera House was giving a grant from the Gates Foundation with the purpose of expanding the public access to computers and the internet, capital I, according to the grant. The amount was for $5,669.
Wow. Crazy timing.
And the World Trade Center was attacked by terrorists.
Yep.
Yep. 15 of the 19 came from the Saudi Arabia, not the Saudi Arabia. 2 of which came from the UAE, 1 of which came from Egypt, 1 came from Lebanon. Hint, hint, cough, cock. There are 2 very noticeable countries missing there.
Oh, wonder which ones. Wonder what letter they start with.
Mm-hmm. I'm joking, obviously. 9/11 was a tragic day for almost every American, and somebody who literally saw the smoke rising that day after the collapse, with parents who both worked in Manhattan myself, one of which literally worked blocks away and only missed out because I was being grumpy that morning, didn't make the fucking tunnel, had to be turned around before the actual happens. Literally, that's the well, it's not unreasonable to think that America reacted passionately, as we're very wont to do. Border security really ramped up, though. Mm-hmm. That's the issue. After the attacks, the once porous border between the 2 towns became very much defined, as I saw in the 7 Days article, which was a quote from there. I wanted to quote the BBC article, quote, "Borders are not static places. They change with the mood on one or both sides of the line." The big change to this sleepy border crossing came after the attacks on 11 September 2001. Streets that traversed the border were closed to traffic. Large potted plants were installed in front of the library, a barrier that would have been unthinkable on 10 September. Today, a U.S. Homeland Security vehicle sits outside the library's entrance 24 hours a day. The biggest change, though, is the steady flow of asylum seekers, quote, northbounders, unquote, as they're known, from the U.S. to Canada. This is a quote from somebody who he was interviewing. "I remember one day I saw a van driving up a street on the U.S. side, and this family gets out, and they run across the border." This person named Newman recalled. "It's minus 20 Celsius outside," so obviously they're in Canada. They're not Americans if they're saying minus 20 Celsius. "Outside, and the kids are wearing flip-flops. I'll never forget that," unquote. Side note, I don't know where these kids are from. They sound like Vermonters if it's minus 20 outside.
Still wearing flip-flops and shorts. Yeah.
People separated by the border arranged to meet at the library, embracing among the copies of Philip Roth and Robertson Davies. Among longtime residents here, a strain of border nostalgia persists. Back in the day, you could cross the border effortlessly. Back in the day, the customs agents knew your name and waved you through with a smile. Back in the day, you wouldn't think twice about crossing the border to get a slice of pizza. Back in the day, it isn't said but understood, life was better. Undub quote.
Yeah, it was really crazy living in Vermont and like regularly crossing the border before 9/11 and then crossing after, because it was truly like you would just bring like your birth certificate and they would ask for it maybe. Like it was so casual to just come and go, and the understanding was very much that, you know, Vermont and Quebec, like commerce happened. People lived on one side and worked on the other. So yeah, it's been a really stark reality. So for the Haskell Library, it's extreme. Yeah.
Yep. And we're going to get a little bit more of that, how much stricter and how much stark that reality is going to get.
Oh, yeah.
Now, there's a lot going on in that quote, like I said, including the fact that many people are leaving the U.S. for Canada for asylum, which is more common than people think. I think at this point, the trends are people are leaving the United States to get to Canada, because it's actually harder to get asylum in Canada than the United States than you think.
Yes.
But also what strict boundaries does to a community like this. Mm-hmm. Like, again, so I learned a couple of hours before leaving the house, I saw some NPR art, like the thing on Instagram, where I don't really know who this person was. He was a public figure, maybe a politician in Stanstead. But what struck me from what he was saying was the communities literally share a septic system. They like literally share like water. Like it's to that point where they're connected. The sewage system is the same.
That's wild.
Yeah, it's bonkers.
How do you draw a line through water, Phil?
I don't know. Ask Arizona, Canada, California, and fucking New Mexico. Now, I painted a rosy picture of the place in regards to like the Haskell Free Library earlier. I think it's a beautiful building. It's wonderful what they can do. It's just a normal library at a certain point with an opera house. I will have to play some devil's advocate here because the library hasn't always been a place to just rent books and movies and utilize resources that are otherwise unattainable for the normal human being. Because in 2011, it became part of a massive smuggling operation. Massive is a big term, of a smuggling operation. It really was pretty minor. Between July 2010 and April 2011, Alexis Vlachos, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He's Quebecois. He's from Montreal, smuggled more than 100 guns into Canada.
Oh.
Do you hear about this ever?
No. Yeah. This is before I moved up here, so this is juicy.
Yeah. So I learned about the library for the first time from this story, actually.
Oh.
Yeah. He would work with a gun smuggling ring and gun dealers purchasing guns from Florida. And, of course, it was from fucking Florida. There's a long-standing tradition of Floridan businesses fucking over Vermont businesses, of course. This isn't a business, but just look at Jay Peak. Yeah. And they would smuggle the guns up to, Vermont. And then, now quoting a VT Digger article, quote, according to an indictment, in March 2011, the two other people cooperating with Vlachos, which I don't have their names, would go to the Haskell Free Library and Opera House in Derby Line, a public library that straddles the U.S.-Canadian border. There, they would hide a backpack that contained handguns in a trash can in the library bathroom, then leave, according to the court filings. Vlachos, who was already in the library, he would remove the backpacks from the bathroom, court records stated. He then left the library through the entrance, which is in Vermont, and walked across the border into Canada without going through any port of entry, according to court filings, end quote. He would eventually get caught by U.S. Border Patrol when he tried to cross near Wallace Lake with 34 handguns in his backpack at the time. Yes. And you want to know the level of stupidity?
Please.
They all had serial numbers still, so they could be traced.
Well, he's not perfect. He's a flawed individual. He was caught by U.S. Customs and Border. Was he tried in both the U.S. and Canada and or internationally? Because he's an international gun smuggler. Like, how many jails can he go to?
It's a good question. No, he was sentenced to 51 months in the United States for illegally importing firearms without a license in violation of the Arms Control Export Act.
Okay.
Technically, he was never caught in Canada, so he's in American prison.
51 months.
That's it, yeah.
Okay.
100 guns.
I don't know the equivalent for smuggling guns into Canada, but I can guarantee you it would not only be 51 months. That's insane.
Yeah.
Especially at the volume. Do they even know how many it was?
He said about 100. But, think about it. He had 34 at the time.
Yeah.
So, maybe he was escalating each time. The first time, realistically, when you do something like that, you do one, you do a couple, and then the next time you keep adding. But, he could have theoretically, if he had the same backpack, did it 3 times or 4 times. Granted, what a stupid way of doing it. It worked 3 or 4 times at least.
Gotta keep doing it.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. I know. It was a pretty major deal, but U.S. Border Patrol found out about it. The librarians thought it was suspicious because he wouldn't be renting anything out. He would just be coming in without a backpack, leaving. So at one point they were being indicating that there's suspicious activity happening. Overall, the community realized what was happening. They responded, and it was happening from the United States into Canada. In January 2017, Trump ordered his first travel ban, otherwise known as the Muslim ban. This was because it was restricting certain nations from entering the United States, people from certain nations, by issuing Executive Order 13,769, which was on January 27, 2017, only a few weeks after his first inauguration. Yeah. It's called the Muslim ban, as you can see, because almost every nation was predominantly Muslim with the exception of North Korea, which at this point, I think he'd be fine with North Koreans coming over based off his attitude. This was only rescinded by Joe Biden 4 years later, by the way. The ban happened between 2017 to 2021, the entire time.
Wow.
During this time, the Haskell Free Library became a site where people living in Canada, some of them originated from one of these countries, would meet with family members from the U.S. Though it was a small group of people who did this, really, really small, a few, it did offer an avenue of international cooperation of family members peacefully meeting with one another when there was no other actual avenue available. And frankly, it was pretty clever from them, in my view.
Yeah, if you can't leave the country or get into the country, then yeah, you can just find a place in the middle. Absolutely. That's way better than just like, I don't know, not seeing your family for who knows how long.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm not trying to dox any of the people. I mean, there's an Reuters article about it, but whatever. Of course, I have to say the library had to be closed on March 2020 because of COVID-19. It wasn't reopened fully until spring 2022. So there was restriction there, but everywhere was restricted. All right, we're in modern day. Before we get to the reason why I started and recorded and changed my entire weekend for this podcast, do you have any questions, any expectations? Do you know anything that's going to happen next?
I mean, it's been a big deal up here, but I haven't driven up to the library or even tried to visit any of like the border businesses. I've just been hunkering down. So I am excited to hear what you have to tell me, but I know just from Instagram reels, it's not looking good.
Yeah. On March 4th, 2025, only a few weeks, this is 19 days when we're recording, Homeland Security Secretary and self-admitted puppy murderer Kristi Noem encroached into Vermont, a state where hate does not grow very well in this thin, rocky soil. Again, I cannot stress this enough. In her autobiography or her memoir, she bragged about murdering puppies. I mean, she's talking about like 5-10 years ago.
That's abhorrent.
Yeah, she's not, maybe as a kid when she's 40, so 30 years ago? Still, that's the 90s.
It's the 90s.
It's the 90s.
You could still give a dog up for adoption back then. This is yikes.
Yeah, so think about this mentality of this person when I say this. She visited the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, where she stepped on the tape dividing the library right in the middle. She grinned and said, USA number 1.
Ugh.
Then she crossed into Canada and said, on camera, the 51st state.
What the fuck?
She, quote, she did this at least 3 times and was very clear in saying USA number 1 and didn't even say Canada, just the 51st state, unquote. This was from Deborah Bishop, the library's executive director, who is Canadian, when she spoke to the Boston Globe.
Wait, hang on. 51st state. So Quebec is the 51st state, or Canada is the next 51st state.
Well, it's
is Greenland not the 51st state? They're crossing a whole bunch of wires here. I'm really confused.
Yeah. It's beyond fucking like, oh, there's so like my head hurts thinking about like, all right, so a logical step of the 51st state, you're going to have the second I think it's the second largest country based off of territory alone.
Canada? Yes.
Canada being a state, which what the fuck are you talking about?
It's the dumbest thing. It tells me that everyone who has ever said something like that knows nothing about, I don't know how any country works, including our own.
Or how states work.
What a state is, right? Like what a constitution really should be / what it's used for. And also how, things like trade and commerce actually happen as well. Jeez.
So there's another quote. Quote, it was shocking, unquote, said Sylvie Boudreau, president of Library's Board of Trustees. Again, quote, she repeated it like 2 or 3 times. She didn't say like, I put the like in. The last quote I took from the Gazette. Here is more of that article. Library staff were only alerted of the visit when 2 U.S. Secret Service agents arrived a few hours ahead of Noem. Boutreau said, quote, we could have said no, unquote, she said, but Quote, to avoid problems, to show good faith, we said it was all right that we would have let them enter, unquote. Nome arrived with a whole entourage, Boudreaux said, including U.S. Border Patrol, U.S. Custom officials. U.S. border officials told Nome about incidents at the library, Boudreaux said, which included the cases of gun smuggling into Canada in 2010 and 2011. Boudreaux said she objected to the officials' telling of the events. Quote, it was explained as if it happens every week, unquote, she said. When it was her turn to speak, Boudreaux said she assured Nome that library staff always wanted a secure border. Mm-hmm. Boudreaux said she was speaking with officials in another room when Nome made her 51st state remarks, only hearing about it after the fact. Quote, my employees were very shocked by what they saw, unquote. Witnesses were unavailable otherwise to talk about the Quizette, but, again, quoting Boudreaux, quote, I know it was for the show. It's abnormal. For us, it was not respectful, unquote.
No, and especially, like, I can't believe the action that is the reaction to something done in good faith is abhorrent. Like, that's the worst part. They should have never let them in. But it's not their fault. It's these idiots.
No, I mean, like, what are you going to say if you're a public space and you have Secret Service asking to come? Like, no, I guess. Yeah.
Now I think we're all learning, there is no such thing as in good faith when this is the possible outcome, right?
Yeah. Especially somebody like who's psychotic enough to literally be a child jumping over a fucking line saying 51st state. It's such a childish thing, right?
Absolutely.
Like I could think of 4 or 5 year olds doing this as a game. Like,
yes, they would.
Yeah.
I will say that I think that there is, like, if you are a public space and you pride yourself on public and public privacy, then I think if the library were to unilaterally just say, nope, we're closed to any political people, right? That way it's not just a certain political party or whatever, but then you're also making it more about the public.
In response, Stanstead, in response to this 51st state fucking tactic, I don't know, this antics, this ridiculous show, Stanstead's mayor, Jody Stone, said he was, quote, disappointed to see somebody at such a high level of government using words like that. It's kind of insulting to threaten your neighbors. It's insulting to threaten your friends, unquote.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a deep insult. It's a horrible insult. What are you talking about? You're literally trying to remove their sovereignty by doing that.
And this isn't even like, I think what I hate most about it is that she's not even a part of this. So she's she's walking up to two people who are friends, insulting both of them, and then she walks away, right? But then she's like, well, now you're not allowed to talk to each other.
Yeah, causing a rift that they don't want.
It's classic bully from third grade bullshit.
Of course, it doesn't end right here, right? On March 20th, 2025, only a few days ago, the library has officially closed the main Canadian access to the historic building. Canadians now must cross through Border Patrol to get access to the library through a checkpoint, which is a form of intimidation in my view.
Absolutely. It's,
Yeah. Every single time you have to rent a book from the library that is yours, you have to go through U.S. Customs.
Imagine being, like, again, a third grader, being like, oh, are we going to the library today?
They don't understand that.
And now they see you as a threat, and they tell you that you're a threat, and that's why you can't have access to your it's children's books, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So quoting again from this is something that Sylvie Boudreaux said. This decision disrupts a long-standing tradition of collaboration. Mm-hmm. We're working to find solutions, but we also need support from both governments, which, good for Sylvie Boudreaux, that is one of the most diplomatic ways of calling our government's being completely fucking horrible.
Yeah. I would not have had that kind of poise.
No. Much of what I just quoted comes from Yahoo articles, which, funny, they're still around.
Yeah, it is.
This comes from one as well, another Yahoo article. Quote, a Department of Homeland Security official alleged in a statement to the Daily Beast that the library was being used for drug trafficking. The library is still open, this statement read from the DHS. Drug traffickers and smugglers were exploiting the fact that Canadians could use the U.S. entrance without going through customs. We are ending such exploitation by criminals and protecting Americans. End of statement. Which objectively has not happened.
The Canadians are not the ones doing the illegal things.
It is objective proof that there's no proof, that this has not happened. Period. There's not been drug or gun smuggling going into the United States from Canada. Period.
Nope.
I think this is a failure of the press because bluntly, there are literally no recorded incidents of Canadians smuggling drugs or paraphernalia into the United States. But in fact, the opposite occurred, and they were caught. To play devil's advocate, I will say I did read an article about people driving over the library lawn during the pandemic shut down to try to get into the United States, but they were apprehended by Border Patrol immediately. Besides this incident, this has been an incredibly peaceful place and a symbol of cross-border unity for over 120 years.
Yeah.
No one in either community wants this. Period.
Nope.
Except for maybe that one asshole wearing a red hat, like that bootlicker who was converted into the cult of Trump. Maybe there's one of those guys out there.
The one that we ran out of town when he visited?
Yeah. Well, the geriatric himself. Yeah. Fucking Jerry Skier. Yeah. Closing the border, in my view, will only destroy Derby Line as a community. And this is speculation, but I think I'm not off. Stanstead will probably be better off only because they have more industry and a better economy. But Derby Line, other than some of the farms out there, is honestly mostly inns and restaurants. And the novelty, that is the Haskell Free Library. People do go there for that, myself included.
Yeah.
If Quebecois cannot casually come down for dinner, say, to the Austrian restaurant that we love to go to, then there won't be enough business to sustain it. Period.
Yeah, I think I was listening to either NPR or VT Digger, and they were interviewing the Vermont Chamber. This is going to affect like 30% of income for all businesses in the Northeast Kingdom are because of the Quebecois coming down. Like, this is not this is an attack on the Northeast Kingdom itself because we rely on this transnational interaction.
Yep. Furthermore, the current attack on intellectualism is outrageous and outstanding. The defunding of the Department of Education is a core example, and people will feel that really soon. Regardless of who you are, they will feel that. If kids can't go to school because they can't afford to go to school, think about fucking little rapscallions being on the street because schools have shut down because they can't have the budget. You don't want that. Nobody wants that.
It's also just going to further the rifts that do exist. If your school isn't a place where you can ask questions and learn and get access to new resources, or you can be friends with someone that your parents might not like, but you know they're a good person, then it just deepens the rifts in our own society.
Furthermore, Trump and, again, Musk, who literally means smelly boy, and Doge, which is, again, started as a meme, and he brags about it all the time.
It's the dumbest thing.
Some of the dumbest thing in the world. Literally, children could think about more clever things than this. Has also eliminated the Institute of Museum and Library Services, which accounts for 0.0046% of the federal budget. Meanwhile, museums contribute $50 billion to the U.S. economy annually. And if you don't think that a little bit of money going to museums and libraries doesn't go a long way, there are pure economic values that show that straight up federal stimulus can provide economic growth in things like museums and come back into dollar amounts that are in the billions, and museums are one of the examples. 0.0046, I think that's in the thousandths percent of the budget.
It's small.
This is the opposite of efficiency. This is a direct attack on all Americans, the access to information, and an erasure of history and intellectual knowledge. This is fascism, plain and simple. It's not what fascism looks like. It's not sparkling water with a flavor of fascism. It's fascism. The person I had on this podcast in the episodes, I had to push back to ensure that this episode was still topical that I want to get out. Their name is Claire. They stated that reading is not just a hobby or a thing that could be good at, but a privilege to access the right to freedom of information. And I agree with them wholeheartedly. This current administration is trying to restrict your freedoms in so many ways, and the access to freedom of information is a direct attack on your First Amendment rights. Period. No ifs, ands, or buts. They're taking your rights away. What's going on with the Haskell Free Library and the elimination of the Institute of Museum and Library Services are clear examples of it. What I believe this is an escalation in restricting Canadian access that will end up something that historians will indicate either a minor, hopefully, or even a major event in souring of Canadian-U.S. relations. Let's be clear, Vermonters don't want this. This is stupid, petty bullshit. Now I am not naive enough to think we should just open the border, even if that's something I really would want. That's something I generally want. I think that it would be the best for everybody. Mainly, I don't think it's feasible because our cultures are now so vastly different, and the laws that we have now in place just makes this unfeasible. Canadian gun law is a good example. As a Vermonter who has mixed feelings about the Second Amendment rights and how open they are in the state, I have also had second thoughts about them with the rhetoric that the right has online, trying to make us into subservience due to the fascism. Also, imagine Americans flooding over the border for free health care. That's untenable. What I'm saying is it's not perfect, but damn it, if this action is emblematic of what we should expect in the future, then all I can say is tabernacle, get the feds out of our Green Mountains. No, you cannot have our lumber. Keep your geriatric skiing off our fucking variable slopes. Keep your lips off our maple syrup and stop playing those stupid stunts because Vermonters are only polite to a certain point. Do you have anything else you want to add?
Putain, zut alors.
Cool. All right. We could talk a little bit more. I'm going to do the sources, but there's a lot of sources for this. I went fucking whole hog and spent 8 hours yesterday.
You did a good job, though.
So, Historic Canada website, it's just a website from Canada. U.S. blocks Canadian access to iconic Stanstead border straddling library, local libraries say, by Benjamin Shingler of CBC. Separated by travel ban, Iranian families reunite at border library by Yuganeb Torbati. Sorry if I butchered your name. The Haskell Free Library website, obviously. A 7 Days article, I briefly mentioned that one, was an interview. U.S. unilaterally closes Haskell Library's Canadian access by William Crooks of Sherbrooke Record. Haskell Library responds to Nome's 51st State remark by William Crooks. That's another Sherbrooke Record. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem insults Canadians in bizarre stunt at U.S. border by Conrad Quilt Harper. This one's a Yahoo News article. Another Yahoo News article called Kristi Noem takes bizarre revenge on Canadians at library she used as a stunt by Liam Archatke. Provocation, U.S. Homeland Security Chief calls Canada the first 51st state in library straddling Quebec, Vermont border by Jack Wilson of the Montreal Gazette. The Haskell Free Library and Opera House, a century of history in the Canada-U.S. border. An article on Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network website. There's still some more. Smuggler gets prison term for moving guns through library on border by Alan J. Keyes. This is a VT Digger article. The Gates Foundation website, because, we had to do the Illuminati. The U.S.-Canada border runs through this tiny town. Eric Weiner, BBC. A fire by the pond. The British raid in Derby, Vermont. December 27, 1813. It's an online article or a book by Kenneth Lawson. Derby, History and Agriculture. It's on the uvm.edu website. Derby, a border town in a history of bootlegging. It's buildings of newengland.com. A book published in 1859 written by Austin J. Coolidge and J.B. Mansfield. The book is called A History of Description of New England. Stanstead's, the town's website. Stanstead, Historic Border Town by Matthew Farnfairn, again on Quebec Anglophone Heritage Network. Congress's website, notably, this is the 18th Amendment. It was on Congress's website. I made a note to say the Constitution is no longer available on the presidential website. And lastly, I use Wikipedia articles to try to get some references, notably the Haskell Free Library and Opera House, Derby, Vermont, Derby Line, Stanstead, Quebec, the Abenaki Rogers' Rangers, list of tariffs in the United States, and list of Canadian tariffs.
Woo!
Woo! Okay. Any last words?
Oh, so many, but not enough.
That was a rant. That was cathartic.
Well,
for me.
It's good. No, you did a good job standing up for libraries and the Haskell in particular.
Yeah, and if you come skiing to anywhere near Sugarbush again, just trust me. That was the polite response. All right, cheers. Before I head off, you can find me Lost in the Library. Please like and subscribe everywhere that you can find any podcasts. Feel free to reach out to me. I have a Substack at Fil Deptula. I think this week I'm going to finally try to do some sort of a Patreon. And lastly, I think is it. So if you have any ideas for podcasts, let me know. There might be a short recession. Well, excuse me. That's where my head is at. Secession of podcasts because we're very close to our due date.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Cheers.